Hello, my name is Carl Brown. I'm one of the ministers at North Highlands Baptist Church here in Hueytown, and this is my home. I'm so glad you could join me. Tonight we're going to be continuing with another backyard Bible study going through the Old Testament. And this week is exciting because last week for Thanksgiving we covered the first half of the book of Esther, chapters 1 through 5. But it left us in a cliffhanger as to what was going to happen. And so we're really anxious to get to chapters 6 through 10, the rest of Esther, tonight. So if you would, separate yourselves, get out your Bible, get ready for a good study, and let's get into the Word. Now, just to catch you up or to remind you where we were last week, Esther was chosen among all the women in the Persian kingdom to be the bride of King Xerxes. She was considered the most beautiful and most charming and the most pleasing to Xerxes. And so she is now Queen Esther. At the same time, her uncle Mordecai is an advisor, a low-level advisor or administrator in Susa, the capital, and he has created an enemy in the man Haman. Now Haman is second in charge of the whole kingdom. He has risen above all the other counselors, the other 7 counselors of Persia. And so he is the right-hand man of King Xerxes, and he is living high and in charge. But he hates Mordecai. He hates him because Mordecai refuses to bow to him, refuses to call Xerxes or Haman a god or worship them in any way, and just will not give any honor at all to Haman. And it's an old grudge between the peoples of Israel and the Amalekites. So Haman has gotten the king to sign a decree that on a certain day that all the Jews in all of Persia, all the way from the land of India, all the way to Egypt, all the way up through Turkey, are to be annihilated, that they're to be exterminated. Genocide is going to happen. Mordecai, in the meantime, has come to Esther, the new queen, and said, hey, listen, you don't know what Haman has done, but he's about to destroy all the Jews, and don't think that you'll be exempt or I'll be exempt. God's going to save his people somehow, but it's not going to be us that'll be saved. We're the ones in the capital city. We will probably die unless you do something. And Esther says, well, let's pray, let's fast, and then I will go before the king at my own peril. It may cost me my life. And so she does that. And that was our big drama last week. She went before the king. The king put his scepter out, which means that she had permission. He gave her impromptu permission to be there. If he had not done that, she would have been killed instantly. And she came in and he said, my beautiful queen, I will give you anything you want up to half the kingdom. And she said, you know what? I just want to make dinner for you. Would you come to my apartments tomorrow night? And I'm going to make dinner for you. And why don't you bring Haman with you? And so she did. He did. He brought Haman with him, and they had this great meal, and the king says, what is it you want? I know there's something on your heart. What is it you want from me? I'll give you anything up to half the kingdom. And she says, just come back tomorrow night one more time. Just come back tomorrow night, and tomorrow night, after I cook for you and feed you, I'll make my request then. And the king says, okay, and that's kind of where we left it. And Haman is just on cloud 9 because here he has gotten all this influence. He has been raised in power. He is now one of the most favored people. He feels the most favored person in the entire kingdom outside of Esther because he is the only one that she invited to this special dinner in her apartments with the king. And I just want you to get the idea of how high Haman is flying. We're going to look in chapter 5, verse 9. Haman went out that day from the banquet with the queen, happy and high in spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman restrained himself and went home. Mordecai's ruined his good mood. Calling together his friends and Zeresh, his wife, Haman boasted to them about his vast wealth, his many sons, and all the ways the king had honored him, and how he had elevated him above all other nobles and officials. And that's not all, Haman added. I am the only person Queen Esther invited to accompany the king to the banquet she gave, and she has invited me along with the king tomorrow. Verse 13. But all this gives me no satisfaction as long as I see that Jew Mordecai sitting at the king's gate. Reminds me of somebody, Rick Jagger. I can't get no satisfaction. Here he has all this wealth. He has all this influence. He has all these things. But he can't be happy because of Mordecai. Because of one person is not scared of him. His wife tries to step in and help. Verse 14. His wife Zeresh and all her friends said to him, have a gallows built 75 feet high, and ask the king in the morning to have Mordecai hanged on it. Then go with the king to the dinner and be happy. This suggestion delighted Haman, and he had the gallows built. So late that night, he goes and has the gallows built after the banquet, after the dinner, after meeting with his family, has gallows built 75 feet high just for Mordecai, and he is excited to go the next morning to talk to the king about Mordecai and have him hung from the gallows, and then his victory will be complete when he goes and he's with the queen for another banquet the next night. He has it laid out. And that's where we are. That's where we left off last week. So what's going to happen? Chapter 6. That night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. It was found recorded there that Mordecai had exposed Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, who had conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. Verse 3. What honor and recognition has Mordecai received for this? The king asked. Nothing has been done for him, his attendants answered. Verse 4. The king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had just entered the outer court of the palace to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had erected for him. Verse 5. His attendants answered, Haman is standing in the court. Bring him in, the king ordered. When Haman entered, the king asked him, Haman, what should be done for the man the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought to himself, who is there that the king would rather honor than me? So he doesn't know about Mordecai. He doesn't know about, oh man, this is so good. Who would he honor more than me? So he lays out there in front of the king what he thinks the king should do to honor somebody, thinking that he's about to get honored himself. So here it is. Verse 7. So he answered the king, for the man the king delights to honor, have them bring a royal robe the king has worn and a horse the king has ridden, one with a royal crest placed on its head. Then let the robe and the horse be entrusted to one of the king's most noble princes. Let them robe the man the king delights to honor and lead him on the horse through the city streets, proclaiming before him, this is what is done for the man the king delights in honoring. Haman says he needs to have a parade. He needs to have a parade and a herald going before him. Verse 10. Go at once, the king commanded Haman. Get the robe and the horse and do just as you have suggested for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Do not neglect anything you have recommended. I would have paid big money to see Haman's face when the king said, that's a great idea. Go and do it right now to Mordecai. So So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai himself and led him on horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Now, when I see Mordecai head down, bringing this horse along, I see Mordecai sitting there just as smug as anything, with a smile on his face, sitting on the horse, and Haman in front of him with his head down, going, "Here's what happens with the king. If someone that delights the king, this is what happens to someone the king wants to honor. Everybody look at Mordecai." Going down like Lurch or Eeyore. It was the most humiliating, miserable day of Haman's life, because he had bragged to everybody. And here he is. He hates the Jews. He hates Mordecai most of all. And here he's having to honor him, carry him around, a Jew, and herald it to the whole city. He's went from being top dog to literally leading a horse around and being a herald. I'm sorry. That's just really good. Woo, sorry. What happens afterward? Well, right after, Mordecai just goes back to doing what he was doing. Afterward, in verse 12, Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman rushed home with his head covered in grief. And he told Zeresh, his wife, and all of his friends everything that would happen. Oh, how different today was than yesterday. His advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "Since Mordecai, before whom your downfall has started, is of Jewish origin, you cannot stand against him. You will surely come to ruin." Oh no! Now his wife and his friends are against him. They're like, "You got to leave Mordecai alone." They see that he reached his pinnacle and now he is on his way down. And it's worse than that, because he had to do it. It took all stinking day. Because look, the next verse. While they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman away to the banquet Esther had prepared. So it was all day long. And just as they're telling him, "Oh man, Mordecai, boy, you better watch out. Boy, didn't you say something against all the Jews? You better watch out." And even while they're talking to him, he gets ushered away and go to the banquet. He has been leading that horse all day long. Oh man. All right. Sorry, there wasn't a lesson in that. That's just good. That's good. I know 2020 has been rough. And I know that we all have good days and we all have bad days, but Haman is having a bad day. And it's only going to get worse. I mean, really, really worse. Chapter 7. Now he's on his way to the banquet. So the king and Haman went to dine with Queen Esther. And I'm sure this is probably lifting Haman's spirits, because, he's still, he may have had to take Mordecai all the way around the city on a horse, but he's still the one who was invited to the queen's quarters for a banquet with the king. Verse 2, and as they were drinking wine the second day, the king asked again, "Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom it will be granted." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. if we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. Esther is lovely and beautiful to look at, but she has got a sharp and beautiful mind as well. She knew exactly how to come to this king. She stroked his ego. She fed his belly. I mean, that's really a good way to any man's heart, isn't it? I mean, for real. So she's fed him twice. She's loved on him. She's lovely to look at. She's humble, and he is so pleased with her. He's ready to give her anything. And all she asked for, says, just would you let me live? Would you please let me live, and would you let my people live instead of being destroyed? And catch her humility. She says, if you had just decided to make all of us slaves, that would have been fine. I wouldn't have considered that even enough to bother you with. Because you're so wise and you're the king, and we can deal with any displeasure if it's your pleasure. But if I found favor, can I please have my life? Well, it's a very simple request, and I'm sure it caught King Xerxes totally off guard. And we see that right here. But as much as it caught King Xerxes off guard, imagine what's going through the mind of Haman right now. His mind has to be racing as he's trying to figure out what she's talking about. Verse 5, King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, "Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such a thing?" Esther said, "The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman." Oh man, oh Haman, oh man. His eyes had to grow the size of saucers, man. He just got put out. In his mind, just immediately, oh my goodness, you could just see the realization hitting him. Queen Esther's a Jew? Oh no! And you could see the king getting furious all of a sudden. Oh my goodness, the roof is just caved in. Oh wow. But it gets even worse for Haman. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. The king got up in a rage, left his wine, and went out into the palace garden. But Haman, realizing that the king had already decided his fate, stayed behind to beg Queen Esther for his life. Now get this in your mind. Get this in your head. This has just been revealed to the king. The king realizes that he has been tricked into signing a decree to putting his signet on a law that will have his most favorite beautiful wife executed. And the man who did it is Haman, who is sitting there. And he is so mad he can't even talk. He feels this betrayal so deep. And he just walks out of the room in a rage. But Haman doesn't go to him. He knows he has no chance with him, that the only way to the king's heart right now is through the queen. So he stays back, hoping to beg for his life with the queen, which sounds like a good idea, but oh man, it gets even worse. Verse 8, just as the king returned from the palace. Just, get the word just. It's in this singular moment. Just as the king returned from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman was falling on the couch where Esther was reclining. So to the king, it looks like Haman, I don't know why he tripped, I don't know how he tripped, but he fell on the couch onto Esther, who's laying there on top of Esther. It looks like he is attacking her. The king exclaimed, "Will he even molest the queen while she is with me in the house?" Wow! And that is the last thing that Haman ever saw, because as soon as the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. So while he was out there, he had already gotten he had already gotten people together, the security together to get Haman. And as soon as he said that, they put a bag over his head and led him off. Oh man, it could not have been orchestrated any worse for Haman that day. Matter of fact, there's even a tattletale in the group. It says in verse 9, then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, a gallows 75 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke up to help the king. Well, how helpful are you? Aren't you awful nice to make that known at this moment? I'm sure if Haman was still there, he was probably just, his head got even low. Oh, not something else. The king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. This man who is famous for his fury, famous for flying off the handle at anybody, Haman feels his wrath. He had tried to trick and manipulate and use him to get his vengeance on Mordecai and on Israel and the Jews, but it had backfired in the most spectacular way. Everything that could have possibly went wrong. And on the other hand, for Mordecai and Esther, everything that could have possibly went right. But it's not over. It's not over because there's still the edict out there. There's still the law. And so let's see what happens next in chapter 8. That same day, King Xerxes gave Queen Esther the estate of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came into the presence of the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had reclaimed from Haman, and presented it to Mordecai, and Esther appointed him over Haman's house. So the complete reversal of fortune has happened. Those that were at death's door, dead men walking, have been lifted up. Esther was given Haman's wealth. Everything that he had, his position, everything was taken from him, stripped from him. His life was taken from him. And Esther was given his wealth and all that he had, and she put Mordecai in charge of it. And the king raised Mordecai up to be his new advisor, to be directly under him with his signet ring, so that anything that Mordecai said, anything that Mordecai wrote and signed with that signet ring became law. He was second in charge, just like Joseph was to the Pharaoh. But we still have a problem. So here we go again. Verse 3. Esther again pleaded with the king. Now, this is the same thing happened again. Now, we obviously know that the king loves Esther and is very pleased with her because he did all these things. But now that day is past. The king is sitting in court again, and Esther again she may have more courage because of what he's done for her already, but she again has to approach the king and put her life on the line. Esther again pleaded with the king, falling at his feet and weeping. She begged him to put an end to the evil plan of Haman, the Agagite, which he had devised against the Jews. Then the king extended his golden scepter to Esther, and she rose and stood before it. So this time she doesn't stand there and wait. This time she runs and falls at his feet, weeping and pleading, and he lifts his golden scepter and raises her up. And here's her request. If it pleases the king, she said, and if he regards me with favor and thinks it is right to do so, and if he is pleased with me, let an order be written overruling the dispatches that Haman the Agagite devised and wrote to destroy the Jews in all the king's provinces. For how can I bear to see disaster fall on my people? How can I bear to see the destruction of my family? Well, King Xerxes wants to do anything he can for Esther, but he's limited because the law of the Persians and the Medes, when it has been sealed by the king, it can't be undone even by the king. And that's what he says here. He's between a rock and a hard place. King Xerxes replied to Queen Esther and to Mordecai the Jew, because Haman attacked the Jews, I have given his estate to you, Esther, and have hanged him on the gallows. Now, he's talking to Mordecai. Now write another decree in the king's name in behalf of the Jews, as seems best to you, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For no document written in the king's name and sealed with his ring can be revoked. So the king has an idea. Now the king's not clever enough, apparently, to write and do all these things himself, but he knows that you can put another law or amendum to a law that's already there. And so he tells Mordecai, who is wise and who is very vested and interested in this, he says, I can't revoke it and undo it, but I can do this. Mordecai, why don't you write another law that benefits the Jews and sign it, and we'll make that happen. So at once the royal secretaries were summoned. And so Mordecai sets out and writes out this new law. We see what it says in verse 11. The king's edict granted the Jews in every city the right to assemble and protect themselves, to destroy, kill, and annihilate any armed force of any nationality or province that might attack them or their women and children, and to plunder the property of their enemies. And the day appointed for the Jews to do this was the exact same day that Haman had appointed, the king through Haman, had appointed earlier that anyone could attack the Jews and plunder them and commit genocide. Verse 13, a copy of the text of the edict was to be issued as law in every province and made known to the people of every nationality, so that the Jews would be ready on that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. What Mordecai did was absolutely brilliant. He didn't do something like the day before. He didn't try to do something the day after. He didn't try to, he couldn't change the law so that the Jews wouldn't be attacked. So instead what he did is he added to the law, or added another law that said that it could be a fair fight. The Jews were allowed to fight back. They were allowed to prepare and defend themselves. And if they were attacked, they were allowed to destroy whoever attacked them and take their stuff. So basically, the king, in effect, kind of declares a civil war. He says, all right, we're going to have a fight. May the best man win, I guess is another way of putting it. And it was a brilliant thing to do. Verse 15, Mordecai left the king's presence wearing royal garments of blue and white, and a large crown of gold, and a purple robe of fine linen. And the city of Susa held a joyous celebration. For the Jews, it was a time of happiness and joy, gladness and honor. In every province and in every city, wherever the edict of the king went, there was joy and gladness among the Jews, with feasting and celebrating. And many people of other nationalities became Jews, because fear of the Jews had seized them. So they're celebrating through all the land for all the Jews, because they had been living in fear and they knew that their demise was coming. And now suddenly they had the opportunity to defend themselves. And Mordecai had been raised to this great place of honor. And so it was to everybody's benefit to please Mordecai. And so very few people wanted to go against him, and they were also scared of the Jews now, with them having so much influence, that they started converting to Judaism and started believing and worshiping the true God. So what happens after these celebrations and converts? Well, the day comes, and sure enough, 75,000 people all over the known Persian world were killed in battle. The Jews won a great victory against all of their enemies and any who would oppress them that day. And Mordecai became, and it says, second in charge in all the land, and was preeminent among all the Jews. It was amazing turnaround. Isn't that an incredible story? Who needs a book of fiction when you got something like this that is so good to read? I mean, that is just good reading right there. That's an amazing story of the faithfulness of our God and how he comes through. And so there's really just one lesson I want to learn from this today, but I think it's a very important lesson that something that will come up again and again in your lifetime, and one that needs to be learned and learned well, because every single time it comes up, the temptation will be to go a different direction. So what is the lesson that we've learned? Our very best, our greatest effort can never compare to God's good. What do I mean by that? And why do I say God's good? Well, I say God's good because when God created the earth, the heaven and the earth, he said it's good. And God's good is far beyond anything that we can even come close to measuring to. I can't wait to get to heaven because God said it's great. And so we're living in God's good. Imagine what heaven's going to be like. But going deeper with what I mean is that in our life, we're going to come against real problems, real struggles. Matter of fact, we're promised it. It says in John 16:33 that in this world we will have trials. And so we can anticipate it. We can see it coming, that there's going to be struggles. Jesus said that if you love me, the world will hate you. And we're seeing that more and more. And not as much as other parts of the world, but we're seeing it more and more. If you hold to the Word, if you hold to what's good, if you hold to the Lord, the world will hate you. Our culture will hate you. But that's not all I'm talking about. I mean, I'm talking about more than just spiritual struggles here. We're going to have financial struggles. We're going to have job struggles, career struggles. We're going to have location struggles. Where are we going to live? How are we going to? Basic needs are going to be a problem from time to time. We're going to have relationship struggles in marriages and with our children and with our extended family and just with our neighbors and with other people we come in contact with, other political parties, whatever it is. We're going to have all kinds of struggles in our life. And sometimes decisions have to be made. And what we typically do is we just kind of do our best. We just kind of, when we come to this big fork in the road, a lot of times we will just do our best. Or we come to this wall, we'll just do our best to try to climb over the wall without ever stopping and seeking God's help before we move forward. We will settle just because it ends conflict. We will run away because it gets us away from it temporarily, sometimes permanently. We will handle it. We will deal with the problem ourselves, and that's, I think, what happens most often. We'll just handle it. We'll come at it with our own wisdom, with our own knowledge, with our own experience, and we'll just handle things. And we may do okay. We may do good. As a matter of fact, we may do great. But we also may end up complicating things, and we also may fail, and we also may do very, very badly or just put it off. We do this kind of stuff all the time. What I'm trying to tell you is that the God that created you and the God that loves you and the God that sent his son to die for you and his Holy Spirit to live in you does not want you to do these things on your own. He has good planned for you in your life, and so many times we actually just don't even look for it. We just try to get our own good ourselves. We try to get our own great. We strive for our own great instead of God's good. But when God accomplishes a task for us, when we stop and we put God first, as it says in Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, to trust him with all of our heart, lean not to our own understanding. If we acknowledge him in everything, he will direct our paths. And when he does that, things are way different being in God's plan, God's will, and God's good than it is even when I'm doing my very best on my own. What happens when we do something on our own? What happens when we tackle and get a solution on our own and don't give a second thought to God? Well, if things turn out okay, then we get credit. And sometimes if things turn out really, really great, we get accolades or we get glory for it. And but if things go badly, we get the blame, and we bear the responsibility and the consequences. So that's how we live most of our life, one way or the other, right? But if we find a way to seek God's good for us, to seek what God has planned for us, and to come to Him with our struggles and with our problems, and have the patience to see Him moving and to see His work and what He will do, then what happens? It is always a better outcome. Always better. Always. Always better than we could imagine. It goes way beyond what we could ever do on our own, with greater influence and far-reaching positive consequences than anything that we could have done on our own, and beyond what we could imagine. But more importantly than that, it brings us honor, but it brings Him glory. And that's what we really want, right? I know it's what God wants. God will honor us, but God will always receive the glory and honor He's deserving of. So God will step back. He'll step back. He's a real gentleman. If you don't want Him in your life, He'll let you handle it on your own. But if you ask for His help, and you truly seek His help, and you are willing to submit to His will and do it His way, I think the possibilities are endless. And many times in my life, I've done both. Many times in my life, I've either tried to handle it all on my own, and I got to own my own and got a pat on the back, or made a big mess of things, or I've went the other way and I have trusted in God and things have worked out so beyond what I could even imagine that I found myself truly in tears of gratitude on my knees before my God, thanking Him for doing so much more above and beyond what I could have even imagined, and being just overwhelmed with gratitude and love for the Lord and feeling His great love for me. I'd rather take that road than this road. It has a lot more positives to it, even though it takes a lot more surrender. So what do? Let's see if we can follow the example of Esther and Mordecai here. How do we practically do this in our life? What did Esther and Mordecai do? When the conflict came, when the bad news hit them, the first thing they did was humble themselves before the Lord and pray. That's what Mordecai did. He ripped his clothes, he put on sackcloth, he ashes on his head, and he humbled himself before the Lord and prayed. It's what Esther did. Esther fasted before the Lord and prayed before the Lord. Now, when you're fasting, that's showing God how serious you are about what you're asking Him for. It's showing Him how serious you are about your petition. It is self-sacrifice, and filling that sacrifice with prayer and energy towards praying about your petition before God. After those things, they finally acted, believing that God would lead their actions. And we got to believe in the faith of Mordecai. Mordecai said that, whether we're saved or not, God's going to save the Jews because He keeps His promises. And then the belief of Esther, the courage of Esther saying, that this is what I feel led to do by the Lord. I'm going to do it. And if the Lord decides that it's time for me to die, then it's time for me to die. Not only are you believing that the Lord has your best will, your best interest at heart, but also submitting to whatever that looks like. Whether for Esther it was either death or life. Esther had made up in her mind that the Lord is in charge. I'm asking this of the Lord, but whatever He decides is okay with me. So before you act, you pray and humble yourself before the Lord and seek His will. And as you act, you do it believing that God is leading you and that and submitting yourself to whatever He chooses to do, whatever consequences lay ahead. If we can learn that lesson, we can change the course of our life. So many good things come out of this story. Even a good laugh here and there. I hope you enjoyed it. I have certainly enjoyed teaching it. Next week we are going into the books of poetry next. So we are kind of finishing. We went through Nehemiah, Esther, and Ezra, and so now we're going into the book of Job. And when you're reading the book of Job, it is a big, long book of tells this one story, but it has a lot of poetic language in it, a whole lot. And so if you're reading for next week, if you're trying to prepare for next week, I would suggest that you read the first couple of chapters of Job, that you read maybe chapter 19, chapter 32, and then the last chapter. And then we'll be ready for next week's study, as that's probably the chapters that we're going to cover. I look forward to seeing you then. I hope you have a great night. God bless you.